We're here today again at Genesee Country Village Museum, and they've got a great episode for me today. We're making bread with barm. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking. I'm here today with Peggy Roll. She's the hired cook here in this house, and she's going to show me exactly how to make bread with barm. So I can't help but notice this is a huge kitchen. Can you tell me a bit about the house and maybe even the kitchen?
All right. Well, this is the house was built in downtown Rochester in 1827 by a miller, Mr. Livingston, and after the it was right after the Erie Canal came through in around 1825, and so a lot of wealth was coming into this area, and he could afford to have a big house like this. But then the mills started moving west, and he became bankrupt. And so he sold the house to a Dr. Backus in the 30s. And Dr. Backus lived here. He was the second doctor to come into the Rochester area. And he lived here till the 50s. And he had a hired cook, and that's me. He became a state senator later on, too. So Dr. Backus and his wife, I'm sure, were doing a fair amount of entertaining. And I would have been cooking for them.
Yeah, this is an amazing kitchen, full of, fully equipped and nice and large with this wonderful oven.
Yeah, we have a lovely bread oven that we use, and she probably would have baked once or twice a week and baked the breads and pies and cakes and everything for the family.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about this barm and getting it ready for baking bread. What have we got here?
Well, I got some barm from the local brewery, and I was able to make a liquid starter from it. And so what I did is I started out with a little bit of flour, add a little bit of cold water just to mix it up, and added 2 quarts of boiling water.
Okay.
And then I added some brown sugar, and I let that cool down. I had to cool it down because otherwise I would have killed my yeast.
Right.
And then I added 4 tablespoons of my fresh barm and stirred it up, and then I put it in front of the fire overnight, and then the next day we can use that for our bread.
So there's more that we need to know about barm. I'm going to go over to the brewery and talk to Brian Nagel about where barm comes from and what it is.
There's been a strong connection between bread and beer for about 8,000 years, ever since they started brewing back in the Fertile Crescent in the Mesopotamians and Syrians. We have known there's a connection with the bakeries and the breweries, so we're very happy to be able to continue that tradition here at the museum by offering up our bakers some of the barm, the yeast that's coming on the surface of the wort here. Well, our yeast is working very nicely. The wort's beginning to ferment here in our fermenting tun. And I do know that our village cooks will be quite excited about coming in to collect some barm from us for baking some breads in the village kitchens. So I'm going to dip in and pull out some of that barm, some of our top fermenting yeast for them to have to do some bread baking. There's a great painting by Louis Miller, a Pennsylvania German artist, from the early part of the 1800s, showcasing a lot of villagers coming to the brewery to get not only beer, but also to pick up some barm for their baking as well. So we're quite excited to be able to do that here at the museum as well for our village cooks.
So now what I'm going to do is I'm adding this to about 8 cups of flour.
Okay.
And I'm just going to make a well into my flour, and I'm going to dump it right in.
Okay, so we have our flour, we have our yeast.
And I'm going to make what's called a sponge.
Okay.
And so I'm going to try to stir in some of this. I'm not going to stir in all the flour right now because we'll need to add a little bit more water to it.
Okay.
But I'm going to stir this in like this. And Miss Leslie's cookbook tells us that we're supposed to then scatter a little flour on top. And then when you can see it bubbling up through the flour, then we're ready to go.
Okay.
So we're checking to make sure that our yeast is active by making this sponge.
So we're going to set this aside. How long are we going to wait?
It might be an hour, maybe.
Okay.
And sometimes a little longer. And then what I'll be doing is adding some more water. This is sort of reverse to the normal way I would have made bread, in that I start out with the flour that I want and add the liquid that I need.
And do we set this by the fire or just someplace warm-ish?
In a warm place. I'm going to cover it up.
Okay.
And then I'll be able to set it in a warm place, I usually put it on a trivet over near the fire, but not right next to it.
Wonderful.
So here I have a nice,
Right, you
lovely
can tell
sort of
it's
mass here.
active and it's ready to go.
I do have to add a little bit of salt.
Okay.
So I'm going to put about 2 teaspoons of salt in here. I'm going to put some flour on my board here.
Okay.
And a little flour on top so I can dig it out of here. So then we can just start kneading it. It's real nice dough.
It's so very white too.
It is. Well, this is a wealthy household, so we probably would have gotten the finest flour we could have gotten.
I'm here today with Pat Mead. She's the head of foodways here at Genesee Country Village and Museum, and we're talking about this recipe. The recipe that we're making this bread from is
from Miss Leslie's cookbook. And Miss Leslie is an author from Philadelphia. But she cites in her book, when you make bread, you need to use the finest ingredients, and especially your flour. And she also says you should purchase it from Hiram Smith from Rochester, New York. Now, where we are here in the village or so is wheatland, and this is where they would be growing the wheat. It is also mentioned in books that Queen Victoria ordered her flour from here because it was known as the finest, some of the finest flour around.
that's happening right here in Rochester.
That's right.
So it was a wheat growing area, specifically a good wheat growing area, and it did have lots of mills in the area too.
It did. Later on, they moved out west, but there were quite a few here. And also, what was very interesting is that down in Mumford, not too far from here, is the Presbyterian Church, and you can find Hiram Smith's window there, stained glass window in memory of
So
him.
he probably paid for his family, paid for a special window in the church
I
right
think
here in
so.
Mumford.
Right.
Wow. So I want to thank Pat for giving us this little bit of extra knowledge about wheat and flour that came from right here in the Rochester, New York area. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I would need this probably for 8 or 10 minutes until it's nice and stretchy and you have a nice ball. But this is actually pretty good. And you're just making it nice and firm. You're developing the gluten. But you notice that I didn't add any butter or oil or sugar to this. This is a very simple receipt, and it just has flour and salt and this barm starter.
Right.
And that's it.
And water, yeah.
It gave wonderful flavor. So this was a double batch of bread, and so I'm going to cut the loaf here in half and make 2 rounds out of it. And I'm going to put it in my buttered dish here, just like that, and I will cover it up, and I'll put it in my warm place for an hour or so.
Okay.
And I'll wait for my bake oven to be ready, and
So you're just going to let this rise about an hour?
Right, about an hour. That's
Okay.
right.
Until it maybe doubles in sizes?
Yeah,
Size?
it's about doubled inside.
Okay.
That's right.
So here, this one is ready. This one's risen an hour.
Right?
Is it
An
ready
hour
to
or
go
so?
in the oven just like this?
I think it's ready to go. I think let's see, you can feel it sort of soft around the side.
Right, okay, so this one's ready to go in the oven. What about this oven?
This is our bake oven over here that we use. To use my bake oven, I heat it up for 3 hours with a very good fire, and that's going to bring it up to a quick oven, about what we would call 425 degrees. So I'm going to use my peel, and I'm going to take all the coals out of there, and then I'm going to sweep it out with a wet broom. And this, by sweeping out with a wet broom, not only am I getting the rest of the coals out, but I'm also adding a little steam to the oven.
So I just saw you stick your arm in there. What were you doing?
Well, I'm feeling the temperature of the air that's in the oven. I'm not going to touch anything.
Okay.
I'm not going to get burnt. I'm just going to stick my arm in there. If I get up to 7, it's about 425 degrees.
So this loaf is just out of the oven.
Right.
It's baked about 20 minutes.
25 minutes. I checked it and put it in for another minute or two.
And out it comes in the oven. What are we doing now?
Well, we wrapped it up in a damp cloth, and they liked soft crust. Apparently.
Okay.
And so we have it a damp cloth, and we'll let it cool here, and then I will put it in a dry cloth, and we'll put it in our bread box.
So we're not just gonna cut it open right away and start trying to eat it?
They didn't like that way. No, we do, but they didn't like it that way.
Well,
They didn't even think it was healthy. They thought, you really should let it sit for a day or so before you tried to eat it. Here's our loaf of bread, and we couldn't cut this and try and see what it
right,
looks
let's
like.
go ahead and try out your bread. You don't, obviously, we never know what we're gonna find
We don't
inside
know
our
what-
bread.
we don't
Well,
know.
hopefully we're gonna find bread. It smells like a wonderful bread.
They smell
And
good.
it's got some wonderful, it's got a crumb and texture that's great shape. And
Pretty good?
Yeah, it's got some nice rich flavor. It must have really developed some of that sponge there and sitting and waiting. It's developed some wonderful flavors. Obviously, it's baked the perfect amount. This
does.
looks really good, and it's a great and very easy bread to make. Peggy, I so want to thank you for showing me this whole process and how to use this barm. Thank you so much for showing everyone here about this process. It's been very, very interesting. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
And I really do encourage anyone who is in the area, if you're in this Western New York area or even anywhere close, you should really come and visit the Genesee Country Village and Museum. It's an amazing place with all these wonderful buildings and great interpreters, and truly a great living history site. So make sure to come here if you're in the area at all. And I want to thank everyone. As you watch these videos, you experience these experiments in historical cooking and all these wonderful flavors that we get out of this. Thank you so much for joining us today as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th and early 19th century. I want to give a special thanks to all the folks at Genesee Country Village and Museum for all their help. Make sure to check out their website. If you're new to our channel, I want to welcome you. You can subscribe by clicking the button right up here. Also check out our related videos. Thanks so much for watching.